For 40 years, people came to Mama Iyabo's Moi-Moi stand hungry, but food was never what they were really after. Mama Iyabo's hands were buried in the Agunpa River at 2 a.m., not washing, not drawing water, pushing something back down. The water resisted. She pushed harder, whispering in a Yoruba so old it had no modern translation, the words falling from her lips like stones dropped into deep water. Then the river went still. She stood, wiped her hands on her wrapper, picked up her bundle of dark leaves, and walked back toward the market like a woman returning from prayer. 40 years. One river. One covenant that was never supposed to be discovered. Subscribe and hit the bell right now, because by the time this story ends, you will never think about a stranger's kindness the same way again. It started with a cue that made no sense. Oj Market had not fully woken yet. The sky over Ibadan was still the deep blue of early morning, caught between night and the first suggestion of dawn. Hawkers were arranging their wares. The smell of firewood and frying akara drifted through the narrow corridors between stalls. And outside a small corner spot with no signboard, no banner, and no explanation, a queue of 30 people had already formed. A retired professor in a rumpled kaftan stood near the front, eyes closed, hands folded. Behind him, a Danfo driver still in his work clothes, smelling of exhaust and long hours. A woman in a hospital gown, the kind worn in wards, not on streets, stood barefoot in the dust, clutching the gown at her chest. A young man in a full agbada, the kind that cost more than most people in this market earned in a month, stood 3 places behind her without complaint. Moi-Moi watched all of this from the edge of the road, and felt the first flicker of something she refused to call unease. She was a journalist from Accure, sharp, practical, allergic to sentimentality. Her editor had called her on a Thursday evening with the kind of tone he used when he was excited but trying not to show it. "There is a Moi-Moi seller in Oj Market," he had said. "The queue forms before sunrise. My mother has been going for 11 years. Write me something." Moi-Moi had almost said no. She was in the middle of 3 other stories. But she had looked at her half-eaten takeaway and thought 2 days, quick profile, done. She joined the queue. When the brown paper parcel finally reached her hands 20 minutes later, it was warm in a way that felt less like heat and more like something intentional. She unwrapped it. The Moi-Moi inside was deep orange, smooth, fragrant with crayfish, and something underneath the crayfish she could not name. She ate. The market noise fell away. She felt her late father standing behind her. Not a memory. Not a thought. His presence warm, solid, close. The particular way he used to stand near her when she was a child doing homework, saying nothing, just being there. She had not thought about him in 3 years. She stood with the half-eaten Moi-Moi in her hand and stared at it. She did not write what she felt in her notes. She did not know how. She told her editor she was staying an extra 3 days. Mama Iyabo was not what Moi-Moi had expected. She had expected quiet, mystery. The performance of someone who knew they were extraordinary. Instead, she found a woman in a faded Ankara wrapper arguing loudly with her bean supplier about the quality of the last delivery, gesturing with both hands, her voice carrying 3 stalls over. When the supplier left, she turned to her neighbor, a pepper seller named Bissy, and spent 4 minutes debating whether a Lagos football club deserved their recent loss. She laughed from her stomach. She bargained without mercy. She called every customer Omo-me, my child, regardless of their age. Moi-Moi watched and took notes and felt, for the first time, genuinely confused. But she was trained to notice what casual observers missed. And 3 things sat at the edge of her attention like splinters she could not stop touching. The first, in all the time Moi-Moi watched, Mama Iyabo never tasted her own Moi-Moi. Not a pinch of raw mixture, not the edge of a finished piece. Nothing. The second, the wrapping leaves. Every Moi-Moi seller in Oj Market used banana leaves or nylon. Mama Iyabo's leaves were different, dark green, waxy, faintly thick, carrying a smell that Moi-Moi could only describe as rain falling on a grave. She asked Bissy about them quietly. Bissy shrugged. "She has always used those. I don't know where she gets them." Third, the customers. Every single one who collected their order paused before walking away. Not long, 2, 3 seconds. But they paused with the look of a person who has just remembered something they had forgotten for years. Mama Iyabo eventually allowed Moi-Moi to watch the cooking. The process was ordinary: beans soaked and blended, crayfish and atarodo and palm oil folded in. Nothing unusual until the wrapping began. Then something shifted. The humming started, low and rhythmic, deeply Yoruba, and Mama Iyabo's hand slowed. Each parcel was wrapped with the focused deliberateness of someone writing a letter to a specific person. Her eyes went somewhere interior and private. "Those leaves," Amwonmi said carefully. "Where do they come from?" Mama Iyabo's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, barely visible, gone before it could be confirmed. Then she laughed warmly, the way grandmothers laugh at questions they find both sweet and irrelevant. "Bush leaves, my daughter. My mother used them. Her mother before her. Some things don't need explaining, they just need continuing." Amwonmi wrote in her notebook. "There is something here that has nothing to do with beans." She was right. But she had aimed at the wrong secret entirely. Mama Iyabo offered her the compound guest room with the easy generosity of someone who had never learned to be suspicious of strangers. Night 1. Amwonmi woke at 1:30 a.m. to silence that felt too deliberate, the way silence feels when something has just stopped rather than never started. She checked the next room. The mat was empty, the wrapper folded neatly at the foot of it. Night 2, she did not sleep. She sat in the dark by the window and watched. At 1:47 a.m. Mama Iyabo moved through the compound like smoke, bare feet on red earth, wrapper tight, something bundled under one arm, and disappeared through the narrow gap in the back wall that opened onto the bush path. Night 3. Amwonmi followed. The path was narrow and the Ibadan bush pressed in from both sides, branches catching at her wrapper, roots finding her feet in the dark. The sounds of the city faded behind her, the distant generator hum, the occasional car on a far road replaced by something older. Insects she had no names for, the rustle of something moving in the undergrowth just out of sight. And beneath all of it, barely audible, a sound like a voice singing from somewhere below the ground. The river bank opened suddenly and stopped. Mama was already kneeling at the water's edge, both hands plunged into her body rigid with effort. The water around her hands churned softly despite the absence of current. She was pushing something back down, something that clearly did not want to go. Her voice came low and continuous, Yoruba words so old and compressed they sounded like a different language entirely. Then the water flattened. She reached into the river one final time, and a bundle of dark leaves and a small clay pot sealed with red cloth. She stood, dried her hands on her wrapper, and turned. She looked directly at the tree was standing behind. "Out, journalist," she said, her voice entirely calm. "I have been expecting you since the first night." Stepped forward. "Since you started following me. Since the night you arrived in Ibadan." Silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing had ever stood inside. If you're finding this story hard to leave, you're not alone. Like this video and keep watching, because what Mama says next changes everything. They sat in the compound under open sky. "No lamp, the kind of Ibadan darkness that feels inhabited," Mama said, "is in the what? Who?" Mama set the clay pot between them. "There is a spirit in the older than this city, older than the name we gave this land. It feeds on human hunger, not the hunger of the stomach, the other kind, grief that has nowhere to go, longing that has been silent so long it has forgotten its own name, shame that has become part of a person's spine, hope that stopped moving years ago and is just standing in place pretending." Pen had stopped moving, she was not sure when. "Spirit knows what each person who comes to my stand is truly starving for," Mama continued. "It tells me through the leaves, through the song. I cook it in. The customer eats. They receive what they need, not always what they want, never what they asked for." The looked at her hands. 1 year for every person truly fed, calculated silently. 40 years, hundreds of customers. "Old are you?" she asked quietly. "Stopped counting," Mama said simply, the way someone says they stopped counting rainfall. "Happens if you." Old woman was quiet for long enough that thought she had decided not to answer. Then her voice came low, measured, like a line in childhood and never forgot. "Hunger comes back for all of them at once." Words settled over the compound like something heavy dropped from a great height. Thought about the professor, the woman in the hospital gown, her father standing behind her in the morning market noise, warm and present and gone in the same breath. "Is something else," Mama said. Something I have not spoken aloud in 40 years. She looked at with an expression that was not quite sadness and not quite relief. The reason I have kept it silent is sitting across from me right now. Came and slow. Sat with her notebook open to a blank page. The recorder on the table between them had 12 hours of material on it, enough for the story of the decade. The kind of story that got syndicated, that got picked up, that put a journalist's name somewhere permanent. She watched Mama set up the mourning stall. The old woman's hands trembled on the first wrapping. She noticed it immediately, the slight shake, the fingers taking longer than usual to fold the leaf into shape. The humming started and broke mid-phrase, started again, broke again. Mama stood still for a moment with her eyes closed, steadied herself, and continued. A customer arrived before the market had fully opened, a young woman, hollow-eyed, moving carefully, clutching a folded hospital letter against her chest. She said nothing. She simply stood. Mama looked at her for a long, unblinking moment. Then she reached for a new leaf. Her hand stopped trembling. The humming came out whole and steady. She wrapped with slow, complete attention, the way you wrap something you know you are giving away for the last time. She pressed the parcel into the young woman's hands, refused the money she offered, and touched her face briefly with her palm. The way a mother touches a child before a long journey. The young woman walked away. After 3 steps she stopped, stood completely still, then continued walking, differently, like something had shifted in her center of gravity. Looked down, her eyes were wet. "River has never sent me a journalist," Mama said, sitting back down. "In 40 years, not once." She reached beneath the table and placed the clay pot between them. The red cloth seal was old and darkened. "This has been waiting here for 11 years, since before you chose this profession. Since before you knew your father was going to die." "Not possible," said. "True things are not possible," Mama said. The recorder sat between them, looked at it. "Stay with this story. What happens next is the part nobody sees coming." "Is inside it?" asked. "Original recipe. From before my grandmother's grandmother. From the night the first covenant was made at that same river bank, when the spirit and the first woman in my line made an agreement neither of them has ever broken." "Are you showing me?" Folded her hands. "Because the covenant has a final condition, the one I have never spoken. A successor must be found, not chosen by blood, not taught, not inherited, chosen by the river. If the chosen one refuses or is never reached in time, the covenant dies with me." She paused. "And the river takes back everything it ever gave, every healing, every year of peace, every moment of restoration pulled back from every living person who ever received it." Compound was absolutely silent, thought about the professor standing in the queue with his eyes closed, the Danfo driver, the woman in the hospital gown who had left a ward before sunrise to stand barefoot in market dust for a portion of bean pudding, her father, his presence so real and warm she had felt the specific weight of his breathing. "Story," she said slowly. "If I publish, world comes," Mama said. "Scientists, journalists, government, crowds, the spirit retreats. The covenant breaks, and everything I described, it unravels, backwards, all of it. If I don't," looked at her steadily, "then you understand why you were sent here, and you have to decide what kind of person you are." Looked at the recorder for a long time. She reached out and pressed stop. Then she picked up her pen, not to file a story. She pulled a clean page from her notebook and set it in front of her. "Show me the recipe," she said. "I want to write it myself, in my own hand." Something moved across Mama Iyabo's face that was too large and too old to be called simple relief. She opened the clay pot. The smell that came out was rain and palm oil and something that had no name in any language Amoanmi had studied. Amoanmi began to write, word by careful word. In Yoruba, which she had not spoken since her father taught it to her in childhood. She did not question how she remembered every word. Mama Iyabo closed her eyes. The exhale that came from her was long and deep, and sounded like 40 years leaving a body all at once. Mama Iyabo's corner at Oj Market still opens before the Ibadan sun finishes rising. The queue still forms before the first call to prayer. There is a woman there now, younger, sharp-eyed, from Accra originally, though she does not talk about that much. She argues with the bean supplier the way the previous woman did. She calls every customer Omo-me. She wraps each moi-moi with the focused attention of someone writing a letter. She hums the same song. Low, rhythmic, deeply Yoruba. The leaves she uses are dark green and waxy and smell like rain falling on something ancient. Nobody in the market knows what tree they come from. Nobody asks anymore. Some things don't need explaining. They just need continuing. If this story reached something in you today, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and tell us in the comments. What do you think Amoanmi's Moi-Moi would heal in you? Drop your comments below. I read every single one.